I'm going to talk about my trip to Guanajuato, Mexico during the summer of 2013. I heard about the trip and program from a fellow student at the University of Minnesota. During my time in Mexico, I volunteered at a community center called Resplandor and gave a ballet class that turned out to be very rewarding for me and my students. I became integrated into the community of a rural area called Cajones and volunteered in their preschool. I also took amazing trips to other areas of Mexico. I went from feeling shy using my Spanish to feeling much more comfortable. The summer was unlike anything I have ever experienced, and I plan to return someday soon. I was very excited to come to Guanajuato. During the months leading up to the trip, I spent lots of time looking at pictures of Guanajuato, watching YouTube videos, and talking to friends who had been to Guanajuato. I was so excited to meet the rest of the students in the Verano in Mexico program, live with my host family, and improve my Spanish. This is a picture of the view from the statue of Pipila, and it's probably the most common image I found on the internet while I was researching Guanajuato. When I arrived in Guanajuato, I was struck by the beauty and the charm of the city. I loved the colorful buildings, the constant stream of activity, and the seemingly endless supply of cultural events that were available. Dance, music, art, museums, and much more. The first 3 weeks in Guanajuato, I was the only student staying with my host family, the Caballero family. My host family was very warm and inviting, and the food was amazing. However, I felt a little lonely the first few days. I loved meeting the other students in the program, but I quickly realized that almost all of them spoke better Spanish than me. I was a little worried that I wouldn't connect with them because of my limited Spanish skills. Everyone spoke English as well, but most of the time Spanish was used. Although I was nervous the first few days, after spending some time with the other students, we all started to bond. I think my favorite bonding experience was being squeezed into the back of this truck together. I still had trouble with Spanish, but practicing so much really helped me start to become more fluent. I was really excited to begin working in the schools. I expected to see classrooms with very few resources. A student who I knew that had previously done the Verano in Mexico program told me that the schools were understaffed and low on resources. He said these problems were even worse in the rural areas. During my first days observing, I noticed the lack of resources immediately, but the kids were so sweet and so eager to learn. They showered me with little gifts of candy, bracelets, and drawings. As I visited more classrooms and tried to choose a placement, I experienced feelings of uncertainty and frustration. We visited several schools, and every time I visited a classroom, I thought, this is where I belong. There are so many kids, and they really need help. Their classrooms would have approximately 40 to 45 students to one teacher. I really had no idea where to go. What I wanted most out of the experience was to form bonds with kids and really begin to understand the education they were receiving. I decided to volunteer every day at the preschool in Cajones. I immediately fell in love with all of the preschoolers. It was very difficult not to. This particular one is David. He was a very sweet, very mischievous little boy, and he loved to read. As I spent time getting to know the preschoolers in Cajones, I observed a schedule that included time spent on counting, talking about the days and weeks on the calendar, singing, and English lessons. I took tons of pictures of the kids, and these are just a few of my favorites. I began to make a point of reading to the kids whenever possible, and they absolutely loved it. They would crowd around and look at the pictures, they would ask questions, and they would talk about the story. A lot of them told me that they didn't have books to read at home, or that they had very few books, so I decided it was very important to do as much reading as possible with them. In addition to our school placements, all of the students in the Verano in Mexico program spent a lot of time in Resplandor, a community center in Cajones. Many of us taught classes, painted the walls, or contributed in our own ways to the center. This is a picture of the outside of Resplandor. The beautiful pictures that are painted on the wall were painted by people in the community who use the center. I gave a ballet class every week to a group of eager girls, most of them about 11 or 12 years old. The more time I spent interacting with all of these kids at Resplandor and in Cajones, the more Spanish I learned. I started to notice that it was easier and easier to speak Spanish with my host family and with all of the people that I was meeting. The community in Cajones was so welcoming. I had never had the opportunity to spend an extended period of time in a place like Cajones getting to know the people. People welcomed me into their homes to talk and offer me food and beverages. I got to see the 5th grade graduation for the primaria. I walked kids home from school, and I even got to help milk a cow one day. One example of the hospitality of the people in Cajones is one day my friend Jen and I were waiting almost 2 hours for a bus to come to take us back to Guanajuato. We met a teenage boy while we were waiting, and he asked a friend to give us a ride to Puente Cias to catch a bus. This really cut back on the time we had to spend waiting. We took trips to unforgettable places in other areas of Mexico. We spent 4 days in Mexico City, and we fit so much into that time. My favorite parts of Mexico City were seeing Ballet Folklorico and visiting La Casa Azul, which is the house of Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. We spent a day in Pozos, which is a beautiful, quiet, old town with lots of old mines. We climbed the pyramids in Teotihuacan. And we spent a day in San Miguel de Allende, relaxing at La Gruta, which was a place with a natural hot spring, and visiting Dolores Hidalgo. I feel like I really only scratched the surface during my time in Mexico. We were never at a loss for things to do, places to go, or people to meet. The students bonded so much as a group. My worry about not connecting with anyone because of limited Spanish skills was not a problem at all. Somehow I was able to meet and form relationships even with people who did not speak any English. Ever since I started learning Spanish, the language has been very special to me. Even my limited Spanish has allowed me to have the experience of feeling integrated into a community and having conversations with so many amazing people I would otherwise not be able to converse with without an interpreter. Guanajuato is the kind of place I know I will want to visit over and over. This trip was so much more than a vacation to me. It opened up my worldview and allowed me to form very special relationships and have amazing experiences. Hasta luego, Mexico, ya te extraño.